Welcome back, men. In the first 3 chapters of this book, we have looked at reconnecting with your wife. Now we come to look at the next important area of reconnecting, and that is with our children, if we're married with children of our own. In this chapter, we look at the critical role that fathers play in the lives of their children and the sad consequences of children not having a meaningful relationship with their dads. In the chapter, we looked at 3 illustrations of boys who lacked a close father-son connection with the sad consequences. We looked at Jason, a young boy in trouble with the law because of an absent father and his frantic mum trying to find help from a counsellor. Then we looked at the lawyer's son, who was in court on forgery charges because his father was not there for him when he needed him the most. And then finally the story of the prison chaplain who found prison inmates eager to send Mother's Day cards to their mothers, but had no interest to send Father's Day cards to their fathers. Why? Because they were largely fatherless men who had absent, abusive, or uninvolved fathers, and so they were trying to prove themselves to be men in wrong and destructive ways. When children, and especially sons, lack a father's positive input into their lives, a deficiency is created that can result in all kinds of emotional and behavioural problems. You see, children don't just need a father, they need fathering. Family counsellor Steve Biddulph, in his book Manhood, goes on to say these words, and let me read them to you. We believe that boys who do not get active fathering, either by their own father or someone else who is willing to step in, will never get their lives as men to work. It's as simple and as absolute as that. And daughters too need their dads for other reasons that we shall look at later. But what a difference it makes when dads are there for their kids. Yes, there are hard-working fathers who still meaningfully engage with their children and have a positive input into their lives. And there are also other men who are stepping in and taking their part as well. There are grandfathers, uncles, sports coaches, school chaplains, church youth leaders, and the like. These are the men who are making a difference and helping to hold society together. We recently had the privilege of having John Anderson, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, at our men's breakfast at our church. John Anderson has been in politics for over 20 years and is highly respected on both sides of Parliament as a committed Christian and a family man. In the interview at our men's breakfast, John Anderson had some important things to say about family life and the importance of dads. So I'd like to invite you now to join with us and with 300 men at this men's breakfast as we listen for a few minutes to what John Anderson had to say.
And I guess the family life as a young fella had its challenges. Your mother passed away when you were 3, and also your dad was in World War II, and so that knocked him around both physically and emotionally. Our dads, I think, are a pretty significant influence on us. And I'm just wondering about what reflections you have about your dad and who he was and what he gave to you.
Dads are important. My father and mother married late because of the interruptions of the Second World War in both of their lives, so both impacted heavily by it. My father was very badly wounded in the Middle East, the famous battle at Al Alamein. And was lucky to survive. And so he didn't marry until he was in his late 30s, because he came home and found that his childhood bride had married an American. Or childhood sweetheart, sorry. So a lot of interruption there. But look, if I were to say to you, how many of you wish you had had a deeper and closer and more satisfactory relationship with your father? I'm not going to do that. But if I were to, the great majority of hands in this room would go up. It is just almost universal thing that men crave deep, satisfying relationships with their fathers. It's in our DNA, it's the way we're wired. And it is an unbelievable tragedy that so many young men now grow up in an environment where dad's absent. You know those riots on the streets of England recently? More than anything else, that was about fractured families. 37% of English kids now grow up in a home environment where one parent is missing, almost always the father. Something like 40% of American kids grow up in an environment where mum and dad are not married. And you know, we live in an age when marriage is back in the headlines, in case you hadn't noticed. But the truth about our society is that we've trashed it anyway. And we ought to be focusing on what we do to rebuild marriage. Because when we talk about selfishness, you know, it is unbelievably selfish not to stop and think through what is in the interests of kids. The fact is that de facto couples who bring children into the world, this is just fact. I don't want to pass judgment on anybody, but we need to know the reality. Those families are 4 to 7 times more likely to break up than married couples. And you know how often married couples break up and then leave kids without a parent. Almost always dad. That's bad for the daughters and it's shocking for the sons because boys need their dads. They need male role models. And if dad's not there, they'll find another one. If there's no dad, they'll join a gang. That's what happens. We know this is all research-based stuff. You can't run away from it. That's what happens, in a nutshell. And we need to take this stuff seriously. We really do. And if you're sitting there thinking, this bloke's having a go at me because I haven't been a good enough dad or whatever, can I just say to you, it's never too late. Never too late. Do everything you can, if it hasn't been as good as it should have been, to make it work and to get re-engaged with your boys. And or if you're in the situation where you can help mentor other boys or whatever, do that.
How important dads are in family life. And it's never too late to re-engage with your children. But how do we do that? The first step we must take is to turn away from some of the inadequate models of fatherhood that we may have grown up with and not pass these on to our children. We looked at 4 main defective models in the chapter. And these might be models that you have grown up with in your own upbringing. The first was the domineering father, authoritarian in style, who was strong on discipline and punishment, but weak on relationship and connecting meaningfully with his children. The second, the negative father, always criticizing, finding fault, setting the bar too high and putting his children down rather than affirming and encouraging them. Or 3, the passive father, who has largely opted out of family life and not actively involved with his children's lives. And fourthly, the preoccupied or absent father, who has either walked out of home life completely or is too preoccupied with work and other things to have meaningful input into the lives of his children. If you grew up with any of these models of fatherhood, accept the strengths and good qualities that your father may have offered you, but learn how to be the kind of dad that your children really need. The good news is this: you can be different. You don't need to pass on or perpetuate the same fathering style to your children. I grew up as one of 5 children with a dad who was very authoritarian in style, heavy on discipline, and very preoccupied with his work as a busy pastor. There are many things I appreciate and admire about my dad, and things he taught me that I really value. But my younger brothers and younger sister especially felt most keenly that Dad was not there for them, that church came first and family second. And because of this, my younger brothers and sister in late teens turned away from home and from faith and the church, and right up to today, 2 of them will have nothing to do with church and nothing to do with God. Why? Because they believe work for the church stole their dads And since church equals God, they don't want to have anything to do with either. When I finally grew up and got married and our first son was born, I made a commitment that I was not going to perpetuate my dad's fathering style to my children. Yes, I was going to put God first in my life, but I was not going to put work or even ministry as a higher priority than family life. And as it turned out, I too, like my dad, became a missionary and then later a pastor. But through those years, with a young family growing up, I resolved to be different and to see my children and my family as the start of my ministry. So even when I was a pastor for 10 years with high demands and a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, I determined to safeguard my family life by putting into my diary 2 nights each week for family time. And I made sure even on Saturdays I gave most of the day for family, for picnics and family outings, before locking myself away to prepare for Sunday. I tried to keep close connection with my boys right through their primary and teenage years by keeping involved in their lives and doing things together, and to this day enjoy a close bond with each of them as married sons. But my greatest joy is that each of my sons follow and serve the Lord. The greatest legacy I want to leave them is faith in God, because that's a legacy that lasts for eternity. I'm grateful for the ways my boys have turned out, but I'm also aware that despite our best efforts as parents, and even if we do everything right, it's still possible that our children can make their own choices, and sometimes bad choices, and go their own way. Men, it's never too late to be the dad you are meant to be. Despite the model of fatherhood you may have grown up with, you can be a good dad to your children. Bruce Robinson, in his book Fathering from the Fast Lane, says that after interviewing dozens of men who grew up with dads who were not good role models, he made the surprising discovery that many of these men had risen above their inadequate upbringing to become great dads themselves. So no matter what kind of dad you had or what kind of dad you are now, you don't need to perpetuate a defective model to your children. With God's help as your Heavenly Father, you can change to become not only a good dad, but a great dad. And if you are among those fortunate enough to have grown up with a good dad to start with, don't take that privilege for granted, but build on that wonderful foundation and pass on those strengths and good qualities to your children. John Eldridge believes that part of our purpose as fathers is to father our children by answering the core questions our children are asking, unspoken questions that need to be answered to help shape their development and their identity. For boys, he says, the core question they are asking their dad is this: do I have what it takes? Am I a real man? And for girls, it is a different question. They are asking, am I lovely? Am I worth fighting for? And they are looking primarily to their dad for the answer. If a father fails to adequately answer the core question his son is asking, do I have what it takes, Dad? Am I really a man? His son will forever be trying to prove he is a man in other ways and will shrink from any situation that will prove that he is not. So he will become either driven or withdrawn. And if a father fails to answer the question his daughter is asking, am I lovely? Am I worth fighting for? And instead of showing love and affection, gives her criticism or remains silent, she will look for that love and affection elsewhere. Our children need to hear us answer their core questions 1,000 times in 1,000 ways over the course of their lives. We do this by the way we father them and relate to them. If you answer your child's question intentionally and answer it with love, you will have offered the best gift a father can give to his children. If you're a father, it's never too late to reconnect with your children and to answer those core questions. Even if your children are now adults, you are still their dad. God is calling you to turn your heart towards home and towards your children in a new way, to be there for them and to be the kind of dad your children really need, and to speak words of love and affirmation into their lives. This will not only bring you fulfillment and joy, but great blessing to your family and a legacy they will always treasure. But what does it mean to be a good dad? That's what we're going to look at in our next chapter, as we look at 5 fathering essentials. So now we come to workshop time, and again, I encourage you as you work through the questions together just to give your brief responses and to encourage one another as you explore this topic together. And then go ahead into the week to prepare for the next chapter that we come to next week. And I'll look forward to being with you again then. God bless you.